Terminator and the Human Condition from June 18th, 2015. I love the Terminator franchise. When I first saw it, it scared me to death. It is responsible for my fear of nuclear war due to that scene in T2 where Los Angeles is destroyed in a powerfully well depicted nuclear explosion scene. But I love it. I love it because it is action packed and unabashedly fun. And I love it because I think it can have a deeper point to make, similar to that of the 2003 remake of Battlestar Galactica. However, I think that the developers of that show were far more conscious of the point being made than the developers of Terminator. More on that below. A few years ago, I did a Terminator marathon in preparation for seeing Terminator Genesis in theaters. And as with all Terminator movies, Genesis was fun. I do not think, however, that it added much, if anything, to the franchise. There is enough of the story left open for a sequel if they really wanted to pursue it, but it ends, spoiler alert, much as Terminator 2 ended, with the theoretical destruction of Skynet and the end of the war against the machines before it begins. Terminator has been screwed up by its developers pretty much since Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. There was hope with Terminator Salvation, but for some reason, it did not do well in theaters and critics panned it. Not as badly as they panned Genesis. Honestly, I thought they ought to have skipped T3 and gone straight into Terminator Salvation as the prequel to the original Terminator, and let T2's ending stand. That way, the rest of the story could focus on the war with the machines, rather than a series of car chase scenes and cool explosions, although admittedly, a series of war films would no doubt include these as well. The real missed opportunity with the Terminator franchise and with Genesis, have missed it permanently, is the opportunity to frankly discuss the human condition, as well as humanity's tendency towards self-destruction. As well as humanity's tendency towards self-destruction. Of course, there are commentaries in the films about the human condition, as John Connor and the Terminator's insightful dialogue in T2, where Connor muses, "We're not going to make it. People, I mean," to which the Terminator replies, "It's in your nature to destroy yourselves." Beyond that, however, most of the discussion of the human condition misses the mark in the sense that humanity is portrayed positively and the machines negatively, except for the Terminator himself, who assimilates to humanity. In T2, a central underlying conflict between the humanistic child John Connor and his mother, who has lost touch with her humanity as a result of raising her child alone in a perpetual state of boot camp, as well as the abuse suffered at the hands of her captors in a state mental hospital, and is hell bent on in T2, a central underlying conflict is between the humanistic child, John Connor, and his mother, who has lost touch with her humanity as a result of raising her child alone in a perpetual state of boot camp, as well as the abuse suffered at the hands of her captors in a state mental hospital, and is hell bent on stopping Judgment Day, even if it means she has to act like a machine to do it. John finally reawakens her to her own humanity when he tries to prevent her from killing Miles Dyson. T3 has little to do with the human condition in an existential sense, and discusses more the concept of fatalism, admittedly a very important topic given climate change and other issues resulting from human self-destructiveness. In T3, Judgment Day is inevitable. If Miles Dyson didn't develop Skynet, someone else would have. More on this below. Terminator Salvation, as good a movie as I think it was, fails in the sense that its commentary on the human condition is much the same as T2, namely that it's ultimately a conflict between those humans who want to fight the machines like machines, such as General Ashdown, and those who, like John Connor, understand that they cannot sacrifice what it means to be human in the name of survival. There is also the question of what makes a person human at all. Marcus Wright chooses to be human in spite of being a machine, but ultimately, in Terminator Salvation, humanity is good and machines are evil, just as in the first three movies. This is where the Terminator franchise really misses the mark, and where 2003 Battlestar Galactica hits a home run. Terminator ultimately fails to have a realistic dialogue about human responsibility for its own destruction in the development of Skynet. It also fails to make any attempt to discuss Skynet's right to exist as a self-aware and arguably sentient entity. It is merely the case that humans are good and Skynet is bad, and the good guys win because Skynet is destroyed. Now, as a Western Orthodox Christian, I see the human condition through the lens of original sin. This means, among other things, that while God intends humans to be good, and we are good insofar as we live into this divinely given essence, the reality of our existence is that evil is prevalent. One of the ways that I interpret the story of the Garden of Eden is through the lens of Eastern Orthodoxy, which teaches that God always intended the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to be eaten so that humans could grow beyond original innocence, but only when they were ready and only under God's guidance. Unfortunately, even Adam realized that the fruit was theirs for the taking. They had the technical skills necessary to pick the fruit and eat it. They did not need God's guidance. They could seize the day. This original sin happens every day. It is repeated throughout history in a never-ending, seemingly inescapable seemingly inescapable cycle of violence and death. Every time our technical abilities and accomplishments exceed our moral maturity, we repeat this sin. One such pivotal moment was almost exactly 73 years ago, July 16, 1945, when the first ever nuclear weapon was detonated in Trinity Desert. The result was that humanity was capable of causing its own extinction. Indeed, we came very close to it on a few occasions during the Cold War and at least one occasion after the Cold War. Little did we know that the seeds of our own extinction had been planted nearly 2 centuries earlier with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which by the mid to late 20th century would be slowly causing global warming. By now, it may very well be too late to stop climate change's near apocalyptic effects. In both of these cases, we ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Again, our technical skills and accomplishments as a species exceeded our ability to understand and accept and manage their consequences. So, full disclosure, I'm not a computer nerd and I don't understand artificial intelligence. Nevertheless, I do know that it is very conceivable to generate a computer that has metacognition, or the ability to know itself as a thinking entity. At which point, I would argue, and I am somewhat fluent in philosophy, that what has been created is a person. If I were using the language of Battlestar Galactica, I might say that we have, at that time, created a Cylon. NPR did a report back in 2010 on the viability of eventually downloading human consciousness, which works similarly to computer data, into machines to create functional immortality. This may very well be the next great leap forward for which we are morally unprepared. At this point, it could be argued that we will have become gods in our own right, creating life, creating intelligence, creating sentience, and creating immortality. In Terminator, humans do this, and yet nothing is said about the moral implications of this. Nothing is said about Skynet's personhood, and finally, nothing is said about the need for humanity itself to change. As said before, where Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines gets it right is in its discussion of fatalism. Judgment Day cannot be averted. Postponed, perhaps, but not averted. Skynet is inevitable. If Miles Dyson doesn't do it, someone else would. If the Manhattan Project hadn't have developed the atomic bomb, someone else would have. If James Watt wouldn't have developed the Watt steam engine, someone else would have. We cannot go back and unmake the atomic bomb or undo industrialization. We cannot take away the knowledge of good and evil, but what we can do is what Adam and Eve failed to do in the garden. We can take responsibility. Now, I suspect that if Adam had not blamed his wife and Eve had not blamed the snake, that if they had just admitted and asked for forgiveness, God's response would have been, well, we have a problem because you cannot take back your knowledge of good and evil, but because of your repentance, I can help you so you can stay in the garden. What is needed is a change in the human heart that begins with owning responsibility for what we as a species have done with our technical advancement. In the Terminator franchise, Judgment Day is averted twice, but human beings are never changed. Human beings are merely assumed good. No responsibility is ever taken for having created Skynet, although a machine is a person, although Skynet. Ugh. In the Terminator franchise, Judgment Day is averted twice, but human beings are never changed. Human beings are merely assumed good. No responsibility is ever taken for having created Skynet, who, although a machine, is a person with moral rights. The closest that we come to is Miles Dyson in T2, who is profusely apologetic for his role in Skynet's development. But rather than his acceptance of responsibility causing him to think through the moral implications of creating life, he merely assists in that life's destruction. Without this change, without repentance, T3 is right and Terminator Genesis is wrong. Judgment Day is inevitable. It cannot be stopped, only postponed. The Terminator franchise had the opportunity to comment on the ways in which we are bringing about our own Judgment Day through nuclear weapons, unrestricted capitalism, and human made climate change, and although it comes close in places, it ultimately elects not to do so. Terminator 3 does not take any time to explain or hint that Judgment Day's fatalism is due to human self destructiveness. It is simply a plot device in the movie, without which the movie wouldn't make sense, since Sarah, John, and the Terminator stopped Judgment Day in Terminator 2. As they say in Battlestar Galactica, all of this has happened before, and it will all happen again. Industrialization, poverty, war, unrestricted greed, weapons of mass destruction, and human made global warming. Lest you think I'm just writing a movie review, I think it extremely necessary to heed prophetic warnings that are often hidden within science fiction fantasy, often unintentionally by the authors. Humans are, in real life, caught in a seemingly inescapable cycle of violence and death. It's not just a movie. It's also not unrealistic to imagine that with the technological development, this cycle could end up looking somewhat similar to what we find in Terminator or Battlestar Galactica, minus certain plot devices like time travel and cool space battles. So, what is to be done?